Let me tell you something most psychologists won't say out loud. IQ gets you hired. Emotional intelligence gets you everything else. The corner office, the relationship that actually lasts, the room that goes quiet when you walk in. And the strange part, most people with extremely high emotional intelligence don't even know they have it. Over the past 3 decades, I have advised Wall Street executive, government leaders, corporates, Fortune 500 CEOs, and military strategists across 4 continents. And the pattern is always the same. The people who rise, who truly permanently rise, aren't the smartest in the room. They are the most emotionally intelligent. Today, I am going to show you 7 signs backed by neuroscience, validated by real stories from boardrooms in Tokyo to emergency rooms in Sao Paulo, that your emotional intelligence is operating at a level most people will never reach. And I am talking theory. I am talking about real people, real moments, real proof. Now, EQ versus IQ reframe. For decades, we measured intelligence the wrong way. IQ tests, SAT scores, grade point averages, and yes, those measure something. They measure how fast your brain processes logic and patterns. But here is what decades of research from Harvard, from Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, from the Max Planck Institute in Berlin have consistently found. The people who actually win in business, in relationships, in life, don't just think well. They feel well. They read what is unspoken. They regulate when others react. They influence without manipulation. That is emotional intelligence. And it is not taught in any university or classroom. Not at MIT, not at Oxford, not at the Indian Institutes of Technologies. It's built through experience, through pain, through paying attention when everyone else is on autopilot. I was in Cambridge, Oxford, and Harvard. Nowhere it is taught. Daniel Goleman's landmark research showed that emotional intelligence accounts for nearly 90% of what separates top performers from their peers at senior leadership levels. Not IQ, not technical skill, EQ. Travis Bradbury's study of over 1 million people found that EQ is the single biggest predictor of workplace performance across every industry, every culture, every continent. So, here are 7 signs backed by psychology, neuroscience, and the real world stories of people who live this every day that your emotional intelligence is far higher than average. Sign 1. You read rooms before anyone speaks. This sign number 1. You check, you walk into your room and you know something is off before a single word is said. Most people process a room through conversation. You process it through micro expressions, posture shifts, the silence between sentences, the smile that doesn't reach someone's eyes. This isn't intuition. This is your prefrontal cortex running social pattern recognition at a speed most people can't access. Neuroscience calls this affective forecasting, the ability to predict emotional states before they are expressed. Research from Dr. Paul Ekman, the man who literally mapped the human face into 43 distinct muscle movements, showed that fewer than 1 in 500 people are natural truth wizards. People who can detect deception and emotional states from facial micro expressions alone without any training. And here is what makes this powerful. In negotiations, in relationships, in any high stakes moment, the person who reads the room first controls the room. Let me show you what this looks like in the real world.
Keiko Tanaka was a 34-year-old mechanical engineer at Toyota's Nagoya plant. One of the few women in senior engineering leadership. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She was never the first to speak. But her team had the lowest defect rate of any division in the company. And her supervisors could never explain why. Here's what Keiko did. Every Monday morning, before the production meeting, she'd walk the factory floor. Not inspecting parts. Inspecting people. She'd notice when a line worker's posture changed. When someone who usually joked around was quiet. When a team lead avoided eye contact with a specific colleague. In one case, she noticed a senior technician, a man with 20 years of experience, who had started arriving exactly on time instead of his usual 15 minutes early. His output hadn't changed. His reports were clean. No one else noticed anything. Keiko pulled him aside. Not to interrogate. Just to ask how he was doing. Turns out, his wife had been diagnosed with early-stage cancer. He was terrified but hadn't told anyone because he didn't want to appear weak in a culture that prizes stoicism and group harmony. Keiko quietly arranged schedule flexibility, connected him with the company's support resources, and never mentioned it in a meeting. That technician later said it was the reason he stayed at Toyota. She didn't read a report. She read a room. She read a person. And she did it so naturally that no one in leadership even understood the mechanism behind her team's performance.
Dr. Emeka Okonkwo is a Nigerian-born trauma surgeon at King's College Hospital in London. He's operated on over 3,000 patients. But ask anyone on his team what makes him exceptional, and they won't talk about his surgical technique first. They'll talk about what happens before the surgery. Emeka has a practice he calls the 30-second scan. When he walks into a pre-op briefing, before looking at a single chart, he scans his team. The anesthesiologist. The scrub nurse. The residents. He reads their faces, their energy, their body language. One morning, he noticed his lead anesthesiologist, a woman he'd worked with for 6 years, was smiling normally, speaking normally, but her left hand was clenching and unclenching under the table. No one else saw it. Emeka paused the briefing. Asked a casual question. "Everything set with the gas supply today?" She hesitated for half a second. Turned out there had been a calibration issue with one of the anesthesia machines flagged overnight, and she wasn't confident the replacement unit had been properly tested. She'd been about to bring it up but felt pressured by the surgical schedule. That 30-second scan potentially prevented a life-threatening complication. And Emeka does it every single time. Not because he was trained to. Because he can't not do it. That's what reading the room looks like when the stakes are life and death. Isabella Reyes was 26 years old when she became one of the youngest data scientists at Palantir Technologies in Palo Alto. Mexican-American. First-generation college graduate. Brilliant with algorithms. But her real superpower had nothing to do with code. Palantir's work involves deploying data analytics for government agencies and large institutions, high-pressure, high-security, politically sensitive environments. And Isabella's job often meant sitting in rooms with military officials, intelligence analysts, and senior bureaucrats who had decades more experience than her. During one deployment meeting with a U.S. federal agency, Isabella noticed something no one on her team caught. 2 of the agency's senior officials, who were supposed to be aligned on the project scope, kept making micro-adjustments in their body language every time the other spoke. Slight chair rotations. Crossed arms that uncrossed only when the other person wasn't looking. Eye contact that was directed at the Palantir team but never at each other. After the meeting, Isabella told her project lead, "Those two are in conflict. If we present our proposal as a unified directive from their office, it's going to fail. We need to create two parallel adoption pathways." Her lead was skeptical. The officials had been perfectly professional. But Isabella insisted. They restructured the approach. And 3 weeks later, the internal conflict between those two officials became public within the agency. The teams that hadn't adjusted their approach lost 6 months of progress. Isabella's team was already adapted. She read the room. At 26. In a room full of people with security clearances and 30 years of experience. Because emotional intelligence doesn't care about your title. It cares about your attention.
Now sign number 2. When someone pushes your buttons, when they say something designed to provoke you, you don't fire back immediately. You pause. And that pause, that is not weakness. That's the most sophisticated form of emotional regulation the human brain can perform. Most people operate on a stimulus response loop. Something triggers them. They react. No gap, no choice, just reflex. Amygdala hijack. The emotional brain takes over and the rational brain gets locked out. But people with high emotional intelligence, like you, have trained, often without realizing it. What a psychologist or psychologists call the response gap. That space between what happened to you and what you choose to do about it. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived Auschwitz, wrote it best. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our freedom. And in that freedom is our growth, your growth. Let me show you 3 people who mastered that space.
Colonel Sun Hee Park spent 22 years in the Republic of Korea Army. One of the highest-ranking women in the ROK military's history. She commanded a logistics battalion of 800 soldiers, in an institution where, for most of her career, women weren't expected to lead combat-adjacent units. Early in her command, during a joint military exercise with U.S. forces, a senior American officer openly questioned her authority in front of both teams. He didn't use her rank. He directed his questions to her male deputy. When she answered directly, he said, in front of 60 soldiers, "I'd prefer to hear from someone with field experience." Sun Hee had more field deployments than he did. Everyone in the room knew it. Her deputy stiffened. Her team's eyes locked on her. The room held its breath. She paused. 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like 40. Then she said, calmly, "Colonel Park. 22 years of service. 14 field deployments. Shall I continue, or would you like to proceed with the briefing?" No anger. No volume. No defensiveness. Just facts, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. That American officer never addressed her improperly again. And her soldiers, every single one of them, said later that that was the moment they knew they'd follow her anywhere. The pause wasn't passivity. It was dominance. Because she chose her response instead of being chosen by her reaction. Marcus Williams teaches 11th grade history at a public high school on Chicago's South Side. African American. 41 years old. Grew up 6 blocks from the school where he now teaches. Marcus deals with provocation daily. Not from administrators. From teenagers who are testing every adult in their life because most adults in their life have failed them. Kids who come from homes where yelling is the default frequency. Where reaction is the only language that's been modeled for them. One morning, a student, a 16-year-old named Deshawn who was brilliant but angry at everything, stood up in the middle of Marcus's lesson on the civil rights movement and said, loudly, "Why do we have to learn about this? None of this changed anything. We're still getting shot." The class went silent. 30 pairs of eyes turned to Marcus. In that moment, most teachers would do one of two things. Discipline, send Deshawn to the office, reassert control. Or deflect. Make a joke, redirect, keep the lesson moving. Marcus paused. He put down his marker. He looked at Deshawn, not with frustration, not with pity, but with recognition. And he said, "You might be right. So let's talk about that. What would change things?" That conversation lasted 40 minutes. The lesson plan was abandoned. But in that 40 minutes, Deshawn went from disruptor to discussion leader. Other students opened up about things they'd never said in a classroom. And Marcus didn't lose control of the room. He transformed it. 3 years later, Deshawn is in his sophomore year at Howard University, studying political science. He still texts Marcus on the anniversary of that day. The pause didn't just prevent a confrontation. It created a future. Arjun Mehta was the CFO of a major division within Reliance Industries in Mumbai. 52 years old. Known for his composure in a corporate culture that moves fast and argues loud. During a quarterly board review, the CEO publicly challenged Arjun's financial projections. Not in private. Not in a sidebar. In front of the entire board of directors, 3 external investors, and a room full of senior executives. He called the projections divorced from reality and implied that Arjun's team lacked rigor. The data was sound. Arjun knew it. His team knew it. Everyone in that room would know it within 2 weeks when the actuals came in. The temptation to defend, to pull up the spreadsheets, to fire back with data, to make the CEO look uninformed, was enormous. Arjun paused. He took a breath. And he said, "That's a fair challenge. Let me walk the board through the assumptions and the stress tests we applied, and you can judge the rigor for yourselves. No defensiveness. No counterattack. Just calm, structured transparency." 15 minutes later, the board affirmed the projections unanimously. And the CEO, who had expected a fight, found himself with nothing to push against. After the meeting, one of the external investors pulled Arjun aside and said, "I've been in 1,000 board meetings. I've never seen someone handle public pressure like that. That's why I trust your numbers." 2 years later, Arjun was promoted to Group CFO. The moment most people pointed to? Not a financial win. That board meeting. The pause.
A military officer in Seoul who turned disrespect into dominance. A teacher in Chicago, that's of course a teacher in Chicago who turned disruption into transformation. A CFO in Mumbai, that's in India, who turned a public attack into a career-defining moment. 3 different arenas, same mechanism. The response gap, the pause. If you have mastered this, if people have told you, "I don't know how you stayed so calm," then sign number 2 belongs to you. Yeah, now if you have recognized yourself in those first 2 signs, stay with me, because sign 3 is the one most people confuse with weakness. And it is actually your greatest weapon. Of course, it will become your greatest weapon. And sign 7, that's the one that separates the top 1% from everyone else. Now comes sign number 3. You don't just understand other people's emotions, you feel them in your chest, in your gut, in your shoulders. Sometimes so strongly it is exhausting. This isn't being too sensitive. This is what neuroscience calls heightened mirror neuron activity. What's heightened mirror neuron activity? Your brain literally stimulates or simulates the emotional states of people around you. It's running an internal model of what someone else is experiencing in real time. A research from Dr. Giacomo Risolati at the University of Parma, the neuroscientist who discovered mirror neurons, showed that certain brains activate motor and emotional regions identically whether they are performing an action or watching someone else perform it. Your brain doesn't distinguish between your pain and theirs. It processes both. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think empathy is about being compassionate. It's not. Empathy is data. It's it's your nervous system collecting information about what someone truly feels, not what they are saying, but what they are hiding. Let me show you three people who turned that data into power.
Dr. Camila Santos is a 38-year-old emergency medicine physician at Hospital das Clínicas in São Paulo, one of the largest hospital complexes in Latin America. She sees over 40 patients per shift. Trauma cases, cardiac events, pediatric emergencies. The volume alone would numb most people. But Camila has a reputation among the nursing staff that borders on the supernatural. They call her a Doutora que sente, the doctor who feels. During a routine triage assessment, a 60-year-old man came in complaining of mild chest discomfort. His vitals were stable. His ECG showed no acute abnormalities. By every clinical measure, he was low priority. 2 other physicians had already assessed him and scheduled him for observation. But when Camila examined him, something happened in her own body. She felt a tightness in her chest, not her own, not a symptom, a resonance. She looked into his eyes and saw something that the monitors couldn't capture. Not pain. Fear. A deep, hidden terror that he was masking with Brazilian masculine stoicism. She ordered an emergency cardiac catheterization. Her colleagues questioned it. The man's labs were borderline at best. The catheterization revealed a 95% blockage in his left anterior descending artery, the so-called widowmaker. He was hours from a fatal heart attack. Camila didn't diagnose that blockage from data. She diagnosed it from feeling what he couldn't say. Her mirror neurons picked up a survival fear that his words and his vital signs were hiding. Empathy didn't make her soft. It made her the best diagnostician on the floor. Dr. Khalil al-Rashidi is a 45-year-old Kuwaiti-born AI researcher at MIT. His work focuses on effective computing, teaching machines to recognize and respond to human emotions. He's published over 60 papers. He's cited by researchers on every continent. But here's the irony. Khalil builds machines that detect emotions because he detects emotions in a way that's always felt like a burden. Growing up in Kuwait City, Khalil was the child who cried when other children were punished. Not his friends. Any child. He felt the humiliation radiating off a classmate who was scolded in front of the class. He felt the shame of a stranger's child in a grocery store. His father, an oil executive who valued toughness, told him repeatedly, "Stop feeling so much. It will make you weak." Khalil didn't stop feeling. He started studying feeling. At MIT, his lab developed an emotion recognition system that outperforms all competitors in identifying microexpressions of concealed distress. When asked how he built the training data set, Khalil was honest: "I didn't start with data. I started with what I've felt my entire life. Then I taught the machine to see what I see." But here's where the story gets personal. In 2023, during a faculty retreat, Khalil noticed a postdoctoral researcher. A brilliant young woman from Ghana who had been quiet during meetings but whose work was exceptional. Others assumed she was introverted. Khalil felt something different. Not introversion. Isolation. The specific loneliness of being the only Black African woman in a predominantly white and Asian research environment where brilliance was assumed for some and had to be proven for others. He didn't give a speech about inclusion. He invited her to co-lead a research project. He cited her work in his keynote. He created space where she could be visible on her own terms. 2 years later, she leads her own lab at Stanford. She credits Khalil, not for mentoring her, for seeing her.
Margaret O'Brien is 67 years old. She's been a family therapist in Bozeman, Montana, for 38 years. She works with ranching families, military veterans, and indigenous communities from the nearby Crow and Northern Cheyenne reservations. In a state where the suicide rate is nearly double the national average, and where men are culturally trained to say "I'm fine" until the moment they're not, Margaret's ability to feel what people hide isn't just a skill. It's a lifeline. One case still defines her practice. A 19-year-old Northern Cheyenne man named Thomas came to her office as a condition of his probation. He sat in the chair, arms crossed, hat pulled low. Answered every question with one word. Fine. Good. Whatever. By every metric, he was a disengaged client. But Margaret felt something in that room that she describes as a cold weight in my stomach. Not anger. Not defiance. Grief. A grief so deep and so old that he'd buried it under years of numbness. She didn't push. She didn't use clinical techniques. She sat with him in silence for 20 minutes. Just sat. And then she said, quietly, "You've lost someone. And no one let you be sad about it." Thomas took off his hat. His eyes filled. His older brother had died by suicide 3 years earlier. On the reservation, where mental health resources are scarce and grief is often processed through silence, no one had ever named what Thomas was carrying. No counselor. No teacher. No family member. Margaret named it because she felt it. Not from his words. Not from his file. From the cold weight in her own body. Over the next 2 years, Thomas completed therapy. He now works as a peer counselor on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, helping other young men who carry the same cold weight. Margaret is 67 years old. She has no social media. She's never published a paper. But she has saved more lives in a small Montana town than most researchers will save in a career. Because she never stopped feeling.
A doctor in Sao Paulo who diagnosed what machines couldn't. An eye researcher at MIT who taught the technology to mirror what his own brain does naturally. A therapist in Montana who saved a life with science and sensation. If you feel what others hide, if you have spent your life wondering why you absorb the emotions around you, stop calling it a weakness. It's a sign. If these signs are hitting close to home, and I know for many of you, this is what I do on this channel. I decode the psychology of elite performance, influence, and the human mind. Subscribe if you want to understand yourself at a level most people never reach. Now let us continue. Because sign 4 is the one that hurts. Yeah, now sign number 4. You have walked away from friendships, partnerships, maybe even family dynamics, not out of anger, out of clarity. People with high emotional intelligence reach a point where they can no longer tolerate emotional dishonesty. The friend who only calls when they need something. The relationship built on convenience, not a connection. The group that requires you to shrink to belong. And leaving wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing you have done. But you did it anyway. Psychologists call this emotional pruning. Yes, emotional pruning. The same way your brain eliminates unused neural pathways during adolescence to become more efficient. A process called synaptic pruning. Emotionally indolent people eliminate relationships that drain more than they build. Dr. Robin Dunbar at Oxford, the anthropologist who established Dunbar's number, found that humans can maintain approximately 150 stable relationships, but emotionally indolent individuals often maintain fewer than average. Not because they can't connect, because they refuse to connect shallowly. It looks cold from the outside. From the inside, it's survival. Let me tell you three stories about the cost and the freedom of outgrowing.
Dr. Wei Zhang is a 39-year-old Chinese-born particle physicist at CERN in Geneva. He grew up in Hefei, Anhui province, the only child of two university professors who had mapped his life before he could walk. Physics degree at the University of Science and Technology of China. PhD at Tsinghua. Postdoc at a Chinese national lab. Return home. Marry. Produce grandchildren. Wei followed the script, until he didn't. His acceptance to CERN's research fellowship was the proudest moment of his scientific career. It was also the moment his family relationships began to fracture. His father saw it as betrayal. Not of the family, of the plan. In Chinese culture, filial piety isn't an option. It's the operating system. But Wei had recognized something that most people spend decades avoiding. The version of himself his family needed him to be, was killing the version of himself that could actually contribute to the world. He loved his parents. He respected them deeply. But he could no longer shrink his ambitions to fit their comfort. The first 2 years in Geneva were lonely. His mother didn't call. His father communicated through his aunt, always in the third person. Tell Wei his father is disappointed. Wei didn't retaliate. He didn't cut them off. He held space. He sent letters, handwritten, in Mandarin, every month. Not defending his choice. Just sharing his life. His work. His small apartment near the lake. The first time he saw data from the Large Hadron Collider that confirmed a prediction he'd spent 3 years modeling. Slowly, over 4 years, the letters started getting responses. His mother sent a photo of herself reading one of his papers. She didn't understand the physics, but she had framed the abstract. Wei outgrew the plan. Not the people. And that distinction, that emotional precision, is what makes this sign so difficult. It's not about burning bridges. It's about walking across them alone until others are ready to follow.
Amara Osei is a 36-year-old black British architect at Foster Plus Partners in London. Born to Ghanaian immigrants in Brixton. First in her family to attend university. The pride of her community. And that pride became a prison. Amara's talent was obvious early. Scholarship to the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL. Top of her class. Recruited by Foster Plus Partners before she graduated. But as her career accelerated, her friendships decelerated. The friends she'd grown up with. The women who'd shared everything from secondary school to their first jobs, started pulling away. Not overtly. Subtly. Comments about how she talks different now. Jokes about her posh architect life. Invitations that stopped coming. And when she'd tried to share her excitement about a project, a library design in Accra, a sustainability initiative in the Middle East, the response was always the same. Silence. Changed subjects. Or worse, must be nice. Amara didn't leave those friendships in a single dramatic moment. She left them the way emotionally intelligent people always do, gradually, painfully, and with full awareness of what she was losing. She told me, the hardest part wasn't the distance. It was realizing that I had outgrown people I still loved. And that loving someone doesn't mean you can grow with them. Today, Amara leads a team of 30 architects. She mentors young Black women from neighborhoods like hers. And she has a small, intentional circle of friends who challenge her, celebrate her, and never ask her to shrink. The old group still exists. They still get together on weekends. Sometimes Amara misses it. But she knows, with the clarity that only emotional intelligence provides, that going back would mean becoming someone she's already outgrown.
Daniel Carrasco is 28 years old. Mexican-American. Grew up in a tight-knit family in El Paso, Texas, 5 siblings, 2 parents who worked multiple jobs, and a community where loyalty means never leaving. Daniel was the first in his family to graduate from college. Aerospace engineering at UT Austin. Then an offer from SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, the kind of opportunity his parents had worked their entire lives to make possible. But the moment Daniel told his best friend since childhood, a guy named Julio who worked construction in El Paso, the reaction wasn't what he expected. Not congratulations. Not pride. So you're just gonna leave us like that? Forget where you came from? That sentence, forget where you came from, is the weapon communities use, often unconsciously, to prevent growth. It reframes ambition as betrayal. It makes leaving feel like abandonment instead of what it actually is, evolution. Daniel went to SpaceX. And for 2 years, his relationship with Julio, and with several other friends from El Paso, was strained to the point of silence. When he'd come home for Christmas, conversations were surface level. The warmth was performed, not felt. The subtext was always, "You think you're better than us now." Daniel didn't think that. He thought about El Paso every day. He sent money home. He tutored his younger sister over video calls 3 nights a week. But he also knew. With the painful clarity of someone who can read emotional dynamics, that his old circle needed him to stay the same so that they didn't have to confront their own stagnation. At SpaceX, Daniel now works on propulsion systems for the Starship program. His youngest sister just got accepted to Rice University. And Julio? 2 years of silence, and then a text, "Hey bro. I'm proud of you. I was just scared." That text is now framed on Daniel's desk. Outgrowing doesn't mean outloving. It means having the emotional intelligence to choose growth even when it costs you the people you started with.
A physicist who outgrew a cultural script in China. An architect who outgrew her Brixton Circle in London. An engineer who outgrew his El Paso roots to build rockets in California. If you have experienced this, the grief of growing beyond the people you love, you know it's the loneliest sign on this list. But it is also the most necessary. Sign number 4. Yeah, now sign number 5. Small talk physically drains you. Not because you are antisocial, but because your brain is wired for depth. It craves meaning, pattern, substance. And when someone spends 15 minutes talking about weather and weekend plans, your mind is screaming for something real. Here is the psychology behind this. People with a high EQ operate on what researchers call deep processing mode, a concept formalized by Dr. Elaine Aron in her research on high sensitivity processing. Your brain defaults to analyzing motivations, contradictions, underlying emotions. It's looking for the signal beneath the noise. Functional MRI studies at Stony Brook University showed that the brains of deep processors activate the insula and prefrontal cortex more intensely during social interactions. These are the regions responsible for self-awareness, emotional meaning-making, and integration of sensory information with emotional context. So when the conversation stays at surface level, it is not that you are bored. Your brain is starving. Here are 3 people who learned to stop apologizing for their death.
Dr. Katharina Vogel is a 42-year-old German aerospace engineer at the European Space Agency in Darmstadt. She's worked on 2 Mars missions and leads a team designing next-generation satellite propulsion systems. Brilliant, precise, and terrible at parties. Katharina's entire career has been defined by depth. She thinks in systems, in variables, in cascading consequence chains. When she talks about propulsion, she doesn't talk about thrust-to-weight ratios. She talks about the philosophy of escape velocity, what it means to build something powerful enough to leave the only world it's ever known. But at ESA networking events, the cocktail hours, the conference dinners, the obligatory social functions, Katharina shuts down. Not because she's shy. Because the gap between what her brain wants to discuss and what the room is offering feels like being asked to breathe underwater. She once left a reception after 20 minutes, sat alone in her office, and wrote a 3-page meditation on orbital mechanics that became the basis for a published paper. A colleague found her and said, "You're missing the party." Katharina replied, "I found something better." For years, she saw this as a deficiency. A social flaw. Something to fix. Until she read Dr. Arendt's research and realized, her discomfort with small talk wasn't a bug. It was the same deep processing engine that made her one of the best engineers in the agency. Now she doesn't apologize for leaving events early. She doesn't force herself through conversations about football and holiday plans. She curates her social energy the way she curates propulsion variables, with precision, intention, and zero waste.
James Kimani is a 33-year-old Kenyan investigative journalist at the Nation Media Group in Nairobi. He's broken stories on government corruption, land grabbing in the Rift Valley, and environmental destruction in the Mau Forest. He's won 2 Press Freedom Awards. James is also the quietest person at any social gathering he attends. In Kenyan social culture, particularly among the Kikuyu community he grew up in, conversation is communal, loud, overlapping, and deeply relational. Family gatherings involve dozens of people talking simultaneously about everything from politics to farm yields to church gossip. And James, since childhood, has been the one sitting slightly outside the circle. Listening. Processing. Waiting for the one sentence in 2 hours of conversation that actually means something. His mother used to worry. "Why don't you talk more? People will think something is wrong with you." His colleagues at the newsroom thought he was aloof. One editor told him early in his career, "If you want to succeed in journalism, you need to network. You need to work the room." James doesn't work rooms. He works people. One at a time. In depth. His breakthrough story, the one that exposed a ring of politicians illegally acquiring public land in Laikipia County, came not from a press conference or a networking event. It came from a 3-hour conversation with a retired county clerk in a tea shop in Nanyuki. A conversation that started with silence. That moved slowly. That went deep into memory, shame, and the weight of secrets held for decades. No journalist who worked the room would have gotten that story. Because the clerk wasn't looking for someone chatty. He was looking for someone who could sit in depth. Someone who wouldn't rush the silence. James was the only reporter who could. His discomfort with small talk isn't a limitation. It's the reason he gets stories that no one else can.
Dr. Yuki Nakamura Williams is a 50-year-old Japanese-American neuroscientist at UCSF. She studies the default mode network, the brain system that activates during introspection, daydreaming, and deep self-referential thought. In other words, she studies what the brain does when it's not doing small talk. And she studies it because she's lived it. Yuki grew up in Portland, Oregon, the daughter of a Japanese mother and an American father. She inhabited two cultures simultaneously. In Japanese social contexts, silence is respected. Depth is expected. Conversation moves like calligraphy, slow, intentional, with meaning in every stroke. In American social contexts, especially in the Pacific Northwest tech culture she grew up adjacent to, conversation moves like ping pong. Fast. Light. Disposable. Yuki never fit the American pattern. At mixers, at academic conferences, at her children's school events, she'd find herself standing near the wall, not out of anxiety, but out of a visceral inability to sustain conversation that didn't go anywhere. Her research gave her the language for what she'd always felt. The default mode network, the part of the brain that lights up during deep processing, competes directly with the task-positive network that handles routine social interaction. In people with high emotional intelligence and deep processing traits, the default mode network is dominant. It's always running. Always looking for meaning. Small talk, Yuki told me, isn't just boring for people like us. It's neurologically expensive. Our brains are spending enormous energy trying to suppress their natural mode of operation. It's like asking a marathon runner to shuffle. Now Yuki hosts what she calls deep dinners, gatherings of 6 people, 3 hours, one question explored from every angle. No small talk. No phones. Just depth. The waiting list has 200 people on it. She stopped fighting her brain. She built a world that matches it.
An engineer in Germany who writes papers instead of attending parties. A journalist in Kenya who breaks his stories through silence. A neuroscientist in California who hosts dinners for depth. If small talks drains you, if you have spent your life wondering why everyone else seems satisfied by surface, it is not a flaw. It is sign number 5. Yeah, then comes sign number 6. When you are wrong, you say so, directly, without a 15-minute justification, without turning it into a debate about who started it. This sounds simple. It's not. It is one of the rarest behaviors in human psychology. Here is why. Admitting you are wrong activates the anterior insula, of course, and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. The same neural regions involved in processing physical pain. Your brain literally interprets it as a threat, a loss of status, a social wound. Research from Stanford's psychology department showed that the more competent a person believes themselves to be, the harder it is for them to admit error, because their identity is fused with being right. This is why the smartest people in the room are often the worst at apologizing. Their IQ becomes their ego. But people with high emotional intelligence override that threat response. They have learned, often through hard experience, that accountability builds trust faster than perfection ever could. And here is the paradox. The person willing to say, I was wrong, is almost always perceived as the most powerful person in the room, not the weakest.
Talia Ben-Ari is the co-founder and CEO of a cybersecurity startup in Tel Aviv. 41 years old. Former Israeli Intelligence Corps, Unit 8200. A woman who has led teams through actual national security crises. In Israeli startup culture, which is famously direct, confrontational, and fast, admitting a mistake publicly is rare. The culture rewards chutzpah. Boldness. Moving forward, not looking back. And Talia had chutzpah in abundance. But when her company's flagship product shipped with a vulnerability, a security flaw in a cybersecurity product, Talia did something that shocked her board. She didn't spin it. She didn't blame the engineering team. She didn't issue a carefully worded press statement drafted by lawyers. She got on a video call with every affected client, 47 organizations, personally. And she said, "This happened under my leadership. I take responsibility. Here's exactly what went wrong. Here's our remediation timeline. And here's what we're changing so it never happens again." 2 clients left. 45 stayed. And 12 of those 45 increased their contracts in the following quarter. When asked why, one client, a German financial institution, said, "Because in 20 years of vendor relationships, no CEO has ever called us to say they were wrong. That's the person I want protecting our infrastructure." Talia told me later. "In the military, I learned that the officer who admits a mistake saves lives. The officer who hides one gets people killed. Business is the same. Lower stakes. Same principle." Her company's valuation tripled in 2 years. The moment most investors point to? Not a product launch. The vulnerability call.
Robert Washington, Bobby to everyone who knows him, is a 55-year-old African-American defensive coordinator in the NFL. He played 8 seasons as a linebacker, then transitioned to coaching. He's been on staff with 3 franchises. And his players would run through a wall for him. Not because he's the most brilliant tactician. Not because he's the loudest voice on the sideline. Because of what happened during a playoff game in 2024. Bobby called a defensive scheme in the 4th quarter that left the middle of the field exposed. The opposing quarterback hit a tight end on a seam route for a 45-yard gain that set up the game-winning touchdown. It was Bobby's call. And everyone, the players, the coaching staff, the millions watching at home, knew it. In the post-game locker room, before anyone could speak, Bobby stood up and said, "That was my call. My mistake. I put you in a bad position and you deserved better. That's on me. No qualifications. No, but the execution was also off. No film analysis to spread the blame. Just ownership." One of his linebackers, a 10-year veteran, told reporters later, "I've played for a lot of coaches. Most of them blame players when things go wrong and take credit when things go right. Bobby is the opposite. That's why we play harder for him than anyone else. Bobby told me, my father was a pastor in Atlanta. He taught me one thing that's worth more than any playbook: a man who admits his wrongs quickly has nothing anyone can use against him. You can't hold power over someone who already held himself accountable. That's emotional intelligence on a football field. And it's the reason Bobby's defenses consistently overperform their talent level. Because his players trust him. And trust, in any arena, is the ultimate competitive advantage."
Justice Priya Sharma served on the Delhi High Court for 22 years before retiring at age 64. She adjudicated over 4,000 cases. And she is known in Indian legal circles for something almost no judge does: publicly correcting her own rulings. In the Indian judicial system, one of the most hierarchical institutions in the world, a judge's authority is foundational. To question a ruling is to question the institution itself. And yet, on 3 separate occasions during her career, Justice Sharma issued sua motu amendments, self-initiated corrections, to her own judgments after reviewing additional evidence or recognizing analytical errors. The most significant came in a labor dispute involving a pharmaceutical company and its factory workers in Uttar Pradesh. Justice Sharma ruled in favor of the company based on contractual interpretation. 3 months later, she encountered new scholarship on labor rights in developing economies that reframed the legal question. She didn't wait for an appeal. She reconvened the case herself and reversed her own ruling. The legal community was stunned. Some called it unprecedented. Some called it weak. One editorial in a national newspaper called it an erosion of judicial confidence. Justice Sharma responded in her written opinion, "The purpose of this court is justice. Not consistency for the sake of ego. If I was wrong, the only erosion is in delaying the correction. That opinion is now taught in 3 Indian law schools as a model of judicial integrity. When I spoke with Justice Sharma after her retirement, she said something I'll never forget: people think power is the ability to be right. It's not. Power is the ability to be wrong gracefully. Anyone can be right. Very few people can be wrong without becoming smaller. Emotional intelligence at 64 years old. On the bench of one of the highest courts in the world's largest democracy. The sign is the same. The arena changes.
Now, a CEO in Tel Aviv who turned a product failure into client loyalty. A football coach in Atlanta who turned a bad call into unshakable trust. A judge in Delhi, that's in India, who turned self-correction into legal legacy. If you apologize quickly, without performance, without defense, if you have always been the person who says I was wrong first, sign number 6 is yours. Yeah, now comes sign number 7. I told you at the beginning, this is the one that separates the top 1%. This is the rarest form of emotional intelligence. This will separate you from others. And if you have it, you have probably been told your entire life that something about you is different. Yes, sign number 7. You control the energy of every room you enter. Yeah, sign number 7. And this is the one. You don't just read rooms. You shift them. When you walk into a tense environment, it calms. When you engage someone in conversation, they feel heard in a way they can't explain. When you leave, people feel different than before you arrived. This isn't charisma. Charisma is performance. This is emotional gravity. It is the ability to regulate not you, just your own emotions, but to unconsciously regulate the emotions of everyone around you. Psychologists call this interpersonal emotional regulation. Research from Yale's Center for Emotional Intelligence, led by Dr. Mark Brackett, shows that certain individuals function as emotional anchors. They stabilize social systems simply by being present. And this capacity is neuroplasticity or neurologically measurable. It correlates with high voltage or high vagal tone, which is the efficiency of your vagus nerve in regulating your autonomic nervous system. People with a high vagal tone don't just calm themselves, they calm others. Of course, they calm others. Their nervous system broadcasts a frequency of course, a frequency of regulation that other nervous systems are tuned to. It's not mystical. It is biology, and it is extraordinarily right.
Thabo Molef is a 48-year-old South African educator who runs a network of after-school programs in Soweto and Alexandra, 2 of Johannesburg's most historically marginalized townships. He serves over 2,000 students between the ages of 10 and 18. Thabo grew up during the tail end of apartheid. He was 12 when Mandela was released. He was 16 when he voted for the first time. And he carries that history, the history of a country that learned to transform its own energy, in everything he does. But what makes Thabo exceptional isn't his curriculum or his funding model. It's what happens in the first 60 seconds after he enters a room. His program directors have all described the same phenomenon. When Thabo walks into one of his centers, even ones experiencing conflict, behavioral crises, or staff burnout, the room changes. Voices lower. Postures open. Children who were on the edge of confrontation settle. Not because he commands it. Not because he raises his voice. Because something about his presence recalibrates the emotional atmosphere. One program director, a woman named Lindai who manages the Alexandra Center, told me, Thabo doesn't enter a room. He arrives. And when he arrives, the room remembers what it's supposed to be. Thabo was asked once, during a teacher training conference in Cape Town, how he does it. His answer was simple: I decide how I feel before I walk in. Not after. The room takes its cue from the person who has already decided. That's interpersonal emotion regulation. That's the emotional anchor. A man in Soweto, educated in township schools during apartheid, who controls the emotional temperature of every space he enters, not through power, but through presence.
Maria Delgado Santos is a 44-year-old Filipino-American nurse administrator at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. She oversees the Pediatric Oncology Unit, a floor where children are fighting cancer and families are living in the space between hope and grief every single day. The emotional environment of a pediatric oncology unit is unlike anything else in medicine. Parents oscillating between terror and forced optimism. Children who understand more than adults think. Nurses and doctors who carry cumulative grief that no training prepares them for. The emotional toxicity, and that's the clinical term, is constant. Maria's unit has the lowest staff burnout rate and highest patient satisfaction scores in the hospital. And every year, Hopkins administrators try to replicate her results in other departments. They study her scheduling, her staffing ratios, her workflow protocols. They implement them elsewhere. And the results don't transfer. Because what they can't replicate is Maria. 3 nurses on her team, all of whom have worked in other hospital systems, described the same experience independently. When Maria is on the floor, the entire unit operates differently. Alarms feel less urgent. Conversations between parents and doctors go more smoothly. Even children who can't articulate emotional theory, become calmer. One nurse said, "When Maria walks in, it's like the barometric pressure changes. You can feel it in your chest. The weight gets lighter." Maria grew up in Quezon City, Philippines, one of 7 children. Her mother was a midwife who delivered over 3,000 babies in a community clinic with no air conditioning and intermittent electricity. Maria watched her mother walk into rooms of screaming women in labor and change the energy through nothing but her voice, her hands, and her calm. "My mother taught me," Maria said, "that you don't treat the disease. You treat the room. Because the room is what the patient actually feels." Maria carries that lesson every day at Johns Hopkins. Not through clinical protocols. Through emotional gravity inherited from a midwife in Quezon City.
Dr. Erik Lindqvist is a 56-year-old Swedish climate scientist at Uppsala University. He's spent 25 years studying Arctic ice loss. He's testified before the European Parliament, advised the IPCC, and published research that has shaped international climate policy. But Erik's most important skill has nothing to do with ice cores or atmospheric modeling. Climate science exists at the intersection of hard data and human despair. The scientists who do this work are processing 2 realities simultaneously, the precision of measurement and the terror of what those measurements mean. Burnout, depression, and what's now called climate grief affect over 60% of climate researchers, according to a 2024 survey by Nature. Erik's research group has the lowest turnover rate of any climate science lab in Scandinavia. His students don't leave. His postdocs don't burn out. And visiting researchers, people who've spent years in the isolation of their own data, consistently describe the same experience. Something about Erik's lab feels different. Here's what he does. Every Monday, before any data review or paper discussion, Erik's lab gathers for what he calls the honest hour. 1 hour. No research. No deadlines. Just a conversation about how they're feeling about the work. About the data. About the future. Sounds simple. It's not. Because what Erik actually does in that hour is regulate the emotional climate of his team the way he studies the physical climate of the planet. He mirrors calm. He validates fear without amplifying it. He names the grief that most labs suppress. And by the end of the hour, people leave grounded enough to go back to studying the most terrifying data set on Earth. One postdoc, a young woman from Bangladesh whose hometown floods more severely every year, said. In other labs, I felt like I was drowning in the data. In Eric's lab, I feel like I'm building an ark. Eric told me, we can't solve the climate crisis if the scientists studying it are emotionally destroyed. My job isn't just to understand the ice. It's to make sure my team can bear the weight of what the ice is telling us. That's the top 1%. A man in Uppsala, Sweden, who regulates the emotional temperature of a room, so that the people in it can save the actual temperature of the planet.
An educator in Soviet who calms a room by dedicating or deciding to be calm before he enters. A nurse in Baltimore who inherited emotional gravity from a midwife in the Philippines. A climate scientist in Sweden who treats his team's emotional atmosphere with the same precision he treats the planets. If people have told you your whole life that something about you is different, that the room changes when you enter, this is what they are sensing. Not charm, not confidence, emotional intelligence operating at an elite level. That is sign number. Here is what most people will never understand about emotional intelligence. It is not a soft skill. It is the hardest skill because it requires you to confront yourself, your triggers, your blind spots, your grief, your history, and still choose control over chaos, presence over performance, depth over noise. IQ is what you are born with. Emotional intelligence is what you built. Through every relationship that broke you, through every room that tested you, through every moment you chose the pose over the reaction, through every time you walked away from something comfortable towards something true. Today, you have heard stories from 21 people, from Sao Paulo to Seoul, from Soweto to Silicon Valley, from Montana to Mumbai. Engineers, surgeons, teachers, judges, journalists, scientists, soldiers, different ages, different cultures, different industries, different continents, same 7 signs, because emotional intelligence isn't bound by geography or gender or generation. It's bound by attention, by willingness, by the courage to feel in a world that rewards numbness. If you recognize yourself in these stories, not just one, but several, you are not just emotionally intelligent. You are operating on a level that most people spend their entire lives trying to reach. And the world needs more of you. People like you, not fewer. Master your success trajectory. And I will see you in the next one.